Baldur's Gate 3 is a great game. Unfortunately, we're seeing this kind of weird discourse going around the internet where we are getting devs trying to explain why they don't think that Baldur's Gate 3 is going to reshape the gaming industry, and gamers are saying, but we wanted to reshape the gaming industry, and these two conversations are flowing past each other. I guess I am going to join the pile of discourse with this video. Let's see if I can do it without getting canceled by either side of the conversation. Baldur's Gate 3 is phenomenal. It is the culmination of a studio that has been working on an engine for 3 games now, Divinity Original Sin 1 and 2, and then finally with Baldur's Gate 3. And they have been honing their craft and really narrowing in on what they need to make this kind of game. There are some tricks that I think they are using in order to allow the game to allow you to do as much as you can. If the game really feels like a D&D game where the party is able to wander off into the grass and the DM is desperately laying track in front of them in order to keep the game working and keeping the illusion going. They are definitely making some choices that allow them to do this. Most of their presentation of conversations is done with canned animation, which looks pretty good. They have made some simplifications in terms of their art style, and all of this comes together into them being able to make a massive amount of content. And I think this is a good series of choices. And I don't think you should be holding any of this against them as a developer. I've talked on this channel a bunch of times about how the best piece of technology is the piece of technology you just use to ship a game. And Larian is doing exactly that. Why wouldn't you? You have a piece of technology you understand well that's optimized to make your kind of game. Why wouldn't you use that to make this game? They've been in early access for years. Awesome. That's amazing because it's allowed them to hone what they're doing, to do tons of bug fixing, and allowed them to release a game that, while not bug free at launch, is still in a pretty good shape off the gate. But is this a new standard for RPGs? I don't think it is, in the same way that I don't think that Elden Ring was a new standard for RPGs, or that Zelda was a new standard for RPGs, or Witcher was a new standard for RPGs, or Dragon Age Inquisition was a new standard for RPGs, or even Skyrim was a new standard for RPGs. I think RPGs as a genre are still varied enough that there are things to be learned from each game as it comes out. There are lessons to be learned, there are tricks to be taught, but the genre itself is still broad enough that lots of things can continue to exist within it. Now, a lot of gamers, when they are saying it's setting a new standard for gaming, are talking about something else. They're talking about this is a single player game with no microtransactions, with little to no DLC that is launching in a complete state. Now that's a different thing. I think if the gaming community wants that, they should continue to demand that. Vote with your dollars and demand that more games launch in this way, that they launch in a complete state, that they don't include microtransactions, that they spend more time getting themselves into as clean a state as possible before they come out, that they make less compromises in the name of making a buck. Larian is self-published, so they were able to do what they felt was best for the game. They were able to make that decision themselves, as opposed to being part of a large public company who is always putting the shareholders first, or being published by a large public company and then being forced to put the shareholders first, even though you aren't part of that shareholder organization. Like I said, what I feel is happening is that we have two groups, game devs and gamers, having two different conversations past each other, and they're not really connecting on what they're trying to say. I think what gamers are saying is, look, it's a game that is a complete game at launch, that is launching with an immense amount of choice. And then game devs are coming and saying, but yes, but they've made compromises on fidelity on game design in order to give that freedom, that they were built under special circumstances. And gamers are saying, I don't care, I still want this. And I think that gamers are well within their right to say, I don't care, I still want this. What game devs are trying to say, I think, is simply that you're not going to see this spread immediately across the industry as a whole, because there are reasons why Larian is able to do things that other studios aren't at the moment. And even if they decided to pivot, won't be able to do for quite a long time. I've talked about reasons versus excuses in a previous video. I'll see if I can link that up here. But that's what I think is going on here. Is I think that most of the discourse that's coming from the game dev side is trying to say, this is why this is this way, and this is why you aren't necessarily going to see this immediately spread across the industry. But what the gamers are hearing is a bunch of excuses. Now, this is being spun up by talking heads on the internet into lazy devs trying to defend their turf and say, we don't want to try. And that is bullshit and infuriating to listen to. And it's made me question some of the talking heads that I follow on the internet. Game devs are trying to make the best game they can within the constraints they have. Now, if you want to complain about those constraints, absolutely. But that's not the devs that are putting those constraints in place. That's the organization, that's the corporation, that's capitalism in general that's putting those constraints in place. Larian is, to a larger degree, able to ignore a lot of those constraints and make the choices they feel are best. Now, it's going to pay off in terms of financial success, but there are reasons why they're able to make choices on different time horizons than a studio that exists inside of a larger corporation that is stuck on this treadmill of quarterly earnings calls. Baldur's Gate 3 does a lot of incredibly clever things that allows it to do more than we've seen from this style of an RPG in quite a long time. The silent protagonist allows them to offer more branching within an individual conversation without having to figure out all of the possibilities. Are some of those branches fake and they're just leading to the same place? Absolutely. But it doesn't matter in the moment because you're making the choice that you feel like. Are they compromising the fidelity of a lot of their cinematic presentation in order to have a larger volume of cinematics? Yes. But can you tell? Not always. So are other games overspending in some of these areas? I think that is an argument that could be made. In a lot of ways, Baldur's Gate 3 is a revelation. It opens up the space of what a AAA game can look like. And that's amazing. Is it going to cause a sea change in the genre, in the industry as a whole? I don't think it will, but like Dark Souls, like Elden Ring, like a lot of games that have come before, I think it can broaden what a mainstream game can look like, and that's great. The thing this reminds me of more than anything is, in fact, From Software's voyage through Demon Souls and Dark Souls and finally Elden Ring to becoming a AAA studio. Like that, I think this is Larian finishing that journey and becoming a AAA studio. This is the final form. This is them in their final form as a AAA studio. But we saw a lot of this same discourse around that time in the Dark Souls 2 and 3 timeframe, where people were talking about this changing the way that games were going to be built. And that's not really what happened. It was a new kind of game that could exist, and you definitely saw them influencing game development, but it wasn't a radical sea change. And that's, I think, what we'll see here, is I think we will see lessons learned within the industry as a whole around monetization, around launching, but also around how you structure choices and how you do branching, and potentially even what the fidelity bar needs to look like for some of your content around the edges. I hope, at least. We should all be happy that we have another big independent developer able to make the kinds of games that they want to make and have a market that seems to be very excited to consume that kind of content. Are there externalities? They absolutely are externalities, but there are always externalities. The IP you used absolutely matters. The moment in time when you launch and the discourse in the industry as a whole, but also just the world as a whole, always matters. And it matters here, and it is helping. But that doesn't make this accomplishment any less. Larian is a big studio, but it's no bigger than any other AAA studio. This is just, like I said, Larian taking its place amongst the other AAA studios. Now, I've been really focused on the AAA response, the large studio response to a lot of this. But I think there's another group of devs who are feeling a little concerned about what's going on. If I make CRPGs, if I was a competitor to Divinity Original Sin or Divinity Original Sin 2, and that was my competition, and then Baldur's Gate 3 comes out, what does that mean for me? Has the bar moved beyond my reach in this case? I'm not sure that I have a really great answer for this, because we've seen both things happen in the past. Sometimes a genre moves from being a relatively niche kind of thing to going mainstream, and the niche remains, and you still are able to make smaller scale, crunchy things that appeal to a smaller audience, that still sell about what they sold before this new entrant changes the landscape completely. If you look at tower defense games, Plants vs. Zombies just blew tower defense out of the water, but it didn't really change what the core niche of tower defense looked like after that occurred. On the other hand, we have seen cases where a big player comes into a space, redefines the genre, in this case CRPG, and effectively squeezes out all the smaller players. Is that what's happening here? I don't think so, because I think we aren't going to see a bunch of big players coming into this CRPG space. So I think the niche will remain to be served by the smaller players. But I guess only time will tell on that one. So hopefully this didn't make anyone too mad at me. I guess to summarize, if you are a dev and you work in AAA, maybe just let Larian have this one. You know the constraints you work under. It isn't really helping the discourse right now to try to explain that to people who are enjoying a game that they really wanted. If you are an indie developer and you're worried about what this means to the future of your genre, I don't know what to tell you. I guess you're just going to have to hold on and hope that your niche remains coming out the other side. If you are a gamer, absolutely demand the game that you want. But know that you're not necessarily going to get it from every single person you demand it of. And know that there are constraints in place on the development side, but on the financial side that you don't completely understand. There are reasons why Baldur's Gate 3 can do things that other games can't, and that you wouldn't want them to do because you wouldn't be happy with the compromises that would be made to give them to. And if you're a talking head that are just deciding that you want to talk about how lazy all the other devs are in the games industry, maybe shut your mouth on that one. Special thanks to my members. They provide the resources that this channel needs to keep running. If you're interested in becoming a member, there's a link to that down in the description. We have merch now. I'm appropriately wearing 2DA Forever. Anyone who's familiar with the development of Baldur's Gate 1 and Baldur's Gate 2 will know why that's appropriate. If you're interested in picking something up, there's a shelf below this video as well. Are you playing Baldur's Gate 3? What do you think? What are things that you hope the game industry learns from this game? What are some things that maybe you're not ready for all games to look like that are in Baldur's Gate 3? Let me know that down in the comments. I will see you again soon. Thank you. Okay, take two, this time with the microphone actually working.